In this episode of Mind Pump, we wanted to talk all about nutrition in regards to fat loss, muscle building, nutrition for performance and athletes. And so we brought on our good friend, Jason Phillips. He's actually one of our favorite people to talk about when it comes to nutrition and macros. He's the founder of the Nutritional Coaching Institute. This dude really knows his stuff. His certification course is one of the best for online fitness coaches that we found ever. And this guy communicates it very, very well. He knows because of his experience working with lots of people. Now, as when he was younger, he himself suffered from body image issues like anorexia, recovered, and then really that drove him to really learn how to apply nutrition the right way. And he personally has worked with big-time athletes, UFC fighters, WWE wrestlers, fitness celebrities, and a lot of everyday people. And of course, I told you, he is the founder of NCI. They are what we consider to be one of the premier online nutrition coaching courses that you can find anywhere. Now, in this episode, we talked about a few different things. We talked about refeeding, what that means, yo-yo dieting, fat hyperplasia. This is when you actually add fat cells. We talked about the value and the bad side of cheat meals. Talked about training fighters, fat versus carbs. There's two main ways people like to diet, either lowering fat or lowering carbs. So we talk about the pluses and minuses there. Talk about protein. When is it appropriate to lower protein? Is high protein always a good thing? Ideal carb sources. We talk about that. We mentioned even ideal protein sources. So we think you're going to love this episode. Now, I also want to let you know that March 21st of this year, Mind Pump headquarters will be hosting a level 1 nutrition coaching specialist certification from NCI. So it's going to be here in our headquarters, and you're going to love this. So before we started the episode, we were talking to Jason, and we convinced him to give us a phenomenal discounted hookup for Mind Pump listeners only. And we went back and forth, and I think we might have pushed him a little bit, but we got what we wanted. So check this out. If you go to ncimindpump.com, you're going to get a full 70% off all of the certifications. It's a massive, massive discount. Again, if you're a fitness trainer, a coach, especially if you work with people online, we find this certification to be one of the most valuable ones you can get for nutrition. Now, before the episode starts, I also want to let you know that MAPS HIIT is 50% off. Now, HIIT stands for High Intensity Interval Training. That's HIIT. Now, this style of training has had a lot of press in the last 10 years because studies show HIIT-style training to burn more body fat in shorter periods of time. So they'll have studies that'll compare like a 20-minute HIIT session to a 60-minute traditional workout session, and the HIIT workout will burn as much or more body fat. So it's pretty crazy. Got popular really, really fast. Now, unfortunately, when things get popular in the fitness space, you start to get a lot of bad information as well. So there's a lot of HIIT workouts out there that are terribly written, programmed, high risks of injury. The workouts aren't programmed with, trying to preserve muscle as one of the number one goals. So we set out to create a HIIT program that was done the right way. We wrote MAPS HIIT. So this is a phenomenal workout. It utilizes the concept of high-intensity interval training, but it's done the right way. We've included 3 levels in this program, so you can be a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. Of course, every exercise is shown on video. We tell you how to do it the right way. We write everything out in a blueprint for you, so you get everything that you need to follow the most effective HIIT-style workout you'll find anywhere for maximum fat loss in the shortest period of time. And that program's 50% off. Here's how you get the discount. Go to mapshiit.com, so that's MAPSHIIT.com, and use the code HIIT50. That's HIIT50, no space, for the discount.
What do you want to get into today? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I was thinking we covered that topic up there. How to lose fat and build muscle. I think most of the questions we get surrounding nutrition are around those two things right there. And maybe we can kind of break down how somebody can figure this out for themselves. Everything from macros, calories, and programming, low carb versus low fat. What are the the differences between the two, that kind of stuff.
Would you say this is one of the number one things you get asked, or what?
I definitely think so. I mean, I think it's fat loss is. I think it's a multi-billion-dollar industry for a reason, right? I mean, when you look at the stats, I actually had them on like a webinar I did recently. It was like a $6 billion, there's like 6 billion overweight people in the world, and then there's several million that are classified as obese. So I mean, like when we look at stats in the country, it's fucking absurd.
In the U.S., I think we've already hit a majority overweight and 40% obese. So you're looking at almost half of the whole country is considered obese.
Yeah, I shared that graph that by 2030 they predict that if we stay on the same trend, that over 50% will be considered obese.
Yeah. Now, first thing I'd like to maybe tackle with this, Jason, is the whole changing, losing fat and building muscle at the same time.
Right.
This is like the super goal, like the ultimate goal, right? How possible is this? What does this look like? What is a diet that does this?
How many people do you know that have done this?
So I mean, I know we're gonna get flamed, right? And there's gonna be all the marketers in the world that are gonna come to me and they're gonna be like, Jason's wrong, but if you can show me peer-reviewed studies that I'm wrong, I'll gladly admit that I am. But just simple science: to lose weight or to lose body fat, you need to be in a calorie deficit. To gain lean tissue, you need to be in a calorie surplus. I mean, physiology hasn't changed. The only exception that I really ever see to the rule is a really low training age. And I'll even tack onto that like a completely like off the wall training stimulus, so like a low training age in a new stimulus. So like somebody that is an experienced bodybuilder, or they've done like hypertrophy style or global gym style training for quite some time, right? And all of a sudden they go to CrossFit. Like the volume completely changes, like the metabolic stimulus changes. Like I've actually seen some recomp there.
Well, they're getting the same benefits that we talk about a lot on the show, and the debate or the argument that I'd have with you is that where I think you're alluding to right now is kind of that those beginner lucky results that everybody kind of gets.
The newbie gains.
Exactly, the newbie gains. You could be, if you come in, you've never really weight trained before in your life, and you come in the gym, and your goal too is fat loss. So let's say your main goal, I want to lose 30 pounds of fat, but your method of doing so, you've listened to Mind Pump, you know that building muscle or lifting weights is the most ideal way. So you start lifting weights. What happens a lot of times, even in a caloric deficit, is because this person's never touched any weights, they also build a little bit of muscle along the way.
I think you have to have a really, really loud muscle building signal and a very, very responsive adaptation process at the same time. And so that usually happens with beginners, with a lot of novelty, right? So new stimulus and or hormonal stimulus like anabolic steroids. Otherwise, it's really hard because building muscle is hard to begin with. Try building muscle while eating low enough calories to also lose body fat. It seems to be kind of competing.
So I don't want to use the word like optimized, but like what you just described, I also think comes back to, I would say like for a client, having them at like a homeostatic balance or having them at homeostasis, right? And I think that when we look at this, when we look at fat loss, when we look at muscle building in general, so many people are already doing it from a compromised state, right? Like think of all the different things they've tried, like all the potential metabolic adaptations from the things that they've tried. So they've tried keto, they've tried carnivore, they've tried fasting, and they've gone like extreme calorie deficit, extreme calorie deficit, extreme calorie deficit. And now, even if they got on like an appropriate macro plan, they're so metabolically adapted, like they're not going to adapt the same way as somebody who has tried nothing, who has no hormonal issues, has no internal physiological issues, right? They're working closer from homeostatic balance, and therefore the results are going to happen faster. But to your point, Sal, like I was so hated on in the CrossFit world in the beginning, before I got loved by the CrossFit world, right? But I was one of the ones that came in the beginning, and I said, "Fuck paleo," and I was like, "This is ridiculous that you guys think paleo is actually going to work long term in this extreme setting,
or it's ideal." Right?
Yeah,
just because it works. Just because it works for some people doesn't necessarily mean.
But it didn't work, and that's so what Sal's saying is 100% true. Like people were seeing results despite what they were doing, not because of what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, when you go in the CrossFit gym, and the first time I went to a CrossFit gym, I had never barbell snatched, I had never clean and jerked, right? I'd never front squatted. Like I didn't even have the fucking mobility to get in a front rack. And so sure,
Perfect.
like, 2.5, 3 months in, I can front squat 400 pounds because I could back squat 500 at that time, right? So like ratio wise, it worked out. I could all of a sudden power clean, AKA reverse curl, 255. I could somehow heave 150 pounds over my head and try to, overhead squat it. And those weren't because of anything I was doing nutrition wise or recovery wise or performance wise. That's just exposure to the movements. So when I used to give seminars, I would say you could achieve the same results in your first 8 to 9 months of CrossFit on paleo, on fasting, on keto, on high carb, on low carb. But I would also go so far as to say you could achieve the same results on 500 calories or 5,000 calories. And I always reference that as a neurological adaptation phase. You're just creating neurological adaptations. You're learning the movements, right? It's all brain. It's all connection in your brain. But at some point, you have to begin physically adapting. And when you start physically adapting, you require fuel and recovery. Like you have to have the proper fuel substrates for the stimulus that you're providing to your body.
Well, when you're trying to add tissue, that requires a certain amount of energy.
Absolutely.
Now, I'll argue that neurological adaptations also require energy, but not nearly
Exactly.
to the same extent. Not nearly.
I don't think you could go in with 0 calories, but I think that your average we live in an obese world, right?
It's an
Like your
extreme
average
analogy, I get it.
detrained person, I really like. I see people that don't eat until dinner, and they're like, "I'm fucking PRing everything," and they would be like, "It's got to be paleo." Well, no, actually, you started eating whole foods, like you have less inflammation and you have exposure to new movements.
Yeah, you just started working out.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's say someone says, "I want to build muscle and burn body fat," and you're saying, "Look, under most circumstances, in most situations, probably not going to happen. It's not
Correct.
going to happen at the same time." What should they focus on first? If I want to lose fat and build muscle, which one should I aim for first?
So I'm a big believer in like your body's most efficient in like the 8% to 12% body fat range, right? So if you're coming to me and you're shredded and you're 6%, right? I hope you don't want to lose fat, but listen, like anyone that heard our first podcast, I started as anorexic, so I get it. But like your average person that's coming to you, if they're in that like 8 to 12% and they're actually like tracking macros, I'd say, hey, like assuming you don't want to look a certain way on a beach or you don't have any physical things coming up, cool, like we could jump into that. Most people are going to be outside of that scope. They're going to be in the 13, 14, 15, probably 20% and higher. I'm going to advise that you actually get healthy and get your body fat under control. And carrying around excess body fat, there's a host of health issues coming with that, right? Increased inflammation, then we start looking at the quality of your sleep, then we look at gut health, and then we just start going down the rabbit hole of all the things that's causing in the body.
So now I know what that looks like for me. I'm curious to how you do it. So I'll share how I would do that because I agree. It's like the first week I'm having them track all their foods and I can see what it looks like. And so, and I actually don't reduce calories, right? I think a lot of people think
you have to be careful not to,
right.
In fact.
Especially when you start getting rid of shitty food that's super calorie dense. Like now I want to make sure I replace it with a food that is, also nutritious, but then I know that that's probably going to be a lot less calories too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, my goal is actually to kind of keep them the same calorically and just start to make healthier, better choices that's going to serve their body more health-wise.
I think we have to look at it too from so one of the things we were talking about off the air before we started is I always live inside of nutritional periodization. Like that's my big thing. And I think 99.9% of people that come to me want to lose fat first, but a lot of people have done such extreme things that they've almost I don't want to say this in like the wrong way, but I want to say in a way that it comes across. They've almost lost the right to lose fat. They've become so metabolically adapted. Their mental issues with food, like their relationship with food, the way that they handle dieting, the process in general. If I allow them to undertake those things, I'm only going to do them more harm than good. Now, Sal, to go to your point, we could look at the physique and we could say, hey, maybe it is proper for them to lose fat first and then gain muscle. But if I get to know the person and I see where this is going and I know I'm setting them up for disaster, I can't ethically as a coach do that.
Yeah.
I talk in the certifications, I talk that my results with a client are defined 10 years from now, not 10 weeks from now. And if I didn't give you the tools to be successful for the next decade, I failed you as a coach. And so really like the legacy and everything of Jason Phillips will be written 10 years from now. It won't be written in 10 weeks or 10 months, right? It's going to be written in 10 years. Did I have the impact on the industry that I want to have? And did I have the impact on the 10,000 people that I've helped? Did I really actually help them, or did I give them a Band-Aid like the rest of the assholes in the industry?
What are some of those questions that you're going to ask that client coming in first, in terms of like being able to evaluate what needs to be addressed and finding that homeostasis and like where you can even get there?
Sure. So, I mean, I think everybody in our space looks at nutrition and training in general purely physical. And I always say that the physical follows the physiological, right? So you're not going to create physical change without physiology being super dialed in. And so I love to look at things like biofeedback, right? I mean, we could start with just a simple list of questions. How's your sleep? How's your energy? How's your mood? How's your focus? How's your sex drive? And we could start there, right? And all of a sudden, you're talking to a male, he's 27, he's got no sex drive. Like, clearly that's a problem. That's a sign testosterone levels are probably low. Like, we can't 100% create correlation, but we can draw some clinical correlation and at least go down the rabbit hole of investigating testosterone. And we all know if testosterone levels are subadequate, well, good luck losing fat and good luck gaining muscle.
And then you also can probably assume that he may be on the end of not getting very good quality sleep also, because we know how much that affects that.
Or it could just let's be honest, as a 27-year-old male, if your testosterone levels are subadequate, or suboptimal, something happened, right? Either you've got a pituitary issue, either you were born like hypogonadal, or you did something to trigger like hypogonadism, right? And so now I need to do like a lifestyle investigation. Is there anorexia in your past? Is there depression in your past? Is there overtraining in your past? Is there a lack of sleep? Are you abusing your body? Are you constantly on alcohol and drugs? Like, what are the things that you didn't put in your intake that you actually need to tell me so that we can have a real working relationship? Like, I'm not here to judge. You want to do drugs? Dope. Like, do drugs. Like, that's on you. I'm not going to recommend it. I don't think it's great. Like,
but I need to know it.
But I need to fucking know.
Right. If I'm going to put together a diet and
it's like when you worked with competitors. Yeah. If they were on steroids, you got to fucking know they're on steroids. Like, it kind of changes how you prescribe.
Yeah.
So.
And how important are these conversations in training successful or working with clients successfully? Because I noticed through the people that you coach, the trainers that take your courses, they come out and they place more of an emphasis on communicating these things than other courses. How important do you think that is versus what's your goal? Let's find what your metabolic rate is. Here's your calories. Let's figure out proteins, fats, carbs, what works best for you. How important is the other stuff that you were just talking about?
I would say it's probably the most important. I mean, listen, when looking at fat loss and muscle gain, the diet itself is most important. Like, you can't implement a shitty diet and expect results. You also can't have a perfect diet and not implement it and expect results. Right. And unfortunately, what I saw, like when I came to the space, was there's a lot of people not getting results, but there was a lot of really intelligent people in the world, like a lot of really good, like, they knew biology, they knew metabolism, they knew physiology, they knew strength training, yet their clients still weren't getting results. And so, like what you referenced, like the coaches that go through our stuff, I teach what I call a connection-based model. And I came in and I was like, man, like it has nothing to do with the fact that your macros are wrong. Because when's the last time you actually fucking hit them? Right? And they're like, oh, it's probably been a week or two because, stress, or I stress ate, or I missed my macros, or I got caught out. And it's like, cool. So a really good coach doesn't just prescribe macros. A really good coach has to understand these things. And it all goes back to like, okay, well, what's first? Do we lose fat or do we build muscle? Well, are you even in the lifestyle position to start losing fat? Like, do you know what it takes to get to super low levels of body fat? I think a lot of people underestimate, there's so much sexy marketing right now around, and actually I saw a really good post on Instagram yesterday. I forget who it was. It was like Jeremy Mullins or something. And he talked, like he got this dude who was pretty overweight. I mean, he's at least 260, 270, and he got him shredded to the bone. And he was like, this shit's hard. Like, anybody that tells you it's not is completely full of shit. And I think that a lot of people have to be ready for a journey where there is some sacrifice and there is.
But to get there can take a while. Like,
absolutely.
I noticed that I'd say probably 8 or 9 out of 10 clients that I'd work with, the easier strategy, and when I say easier, I mean the strategy that was most successful, okay? the most successful strategy was, rather than restricting food, was to actually add food.
Oh,
So they'd come
for
see
sure.
me and they'd say, okay, you're not eating vegetables. Let's have you start eating more vegetables. Okay, your protein intake is low. Don't change anything else about your diet, but I want you to hit this protein goal.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that, they would naturally change the other parts of their diet as well.
Well, by proxy, right? Like, what are you doing? You're increasing satiety, and now all of a sudden they want less of the shit. And so, it makes sense. And that all goes back to, you're a good coach, right? Like, we could all sit here and like, we're all of the same level of intelligence, and like, we all see the industry at like the same way, and we all understand how to build the right diet and like the proper diet. And we could all come to that same conclusion. But the reason our clients are successful isn't because we came to that conclusion. It's what you just said. It's how do you walk them there, right? I mean, I always say in physique transformation that it's like a Mount Everest analogy, right? The pinnacle of Everest is macros, straight. Like, it has to be.
Sure.
Quantity matters. The end. Anybody that says otherwise is completely full of shit,
Right.
Like, that doesn't mean
You can't get around it.
Yeah, you can't, right? Like, if you're trying to achieve optimal physique transformation, you damn well better you better know what your quantity of intake is. The end. That being said, like, when you look at Mount Everest in the real world, like, you don't go to the pinnacle of Mount Everest and fucking stay there. And I don't really believe that every single person should be tracking macros the rest of their life, or should be like held to that extreme the rest of their life. And so, like, what happens when you go summit Everest? You get a Sherpa. They lead you up, and they also fucking lead you down, right? There's checkpoints on the way up. And when you get there, cool. Like, you take your picture, you plant your flag, you do the damn thing, but they're not like, hey, motherfucker, see you later, right? There's a way down from this that's not going to kill you. And I think so many coaches are getting people, they're like, well, I'm going to live at the pinnacle. I'm going to just talk about the pinnacle. I'm going to talk about quantity control. And now I'm going to get sexy because the industry's changing, and I'm going to talk about quality too. But I'm still going to live inside this pinnacle. And what most people need is, they need the journey to that pinnacle. They need to experience the pinnacle. And then they also need to experience the journey down. And there might be multiple journeys inside of this fat loss and muscle gain kind of like paradigm that we're talking about.
And that's lifelong. You're talking about lifelong success within this, rather than short-term intense.
Well, I think there's an application to short term too. I think that if we could use physique competition, but we could use any kind of fat loss. I think that I'm a big believer. Every dose of stress requires a dose of recovery. And if you're putting somebody in a prolonged calorie deficit, 10, 12, 18 weeks, that's a large dose of stress. There has to be a large dose of recovery that comes on the back end of that. And so, I talk about a periodized model. That large dose of stress, we could call that season or active pursuit of goals. You have to bring yourself back to a homeostatic balance, right? Like, if we did blood work after an 18-week diet, we're going to see suboptimal thyroid function. Right? It might be subclinical, it might not be clinically deficient, but we are absolutely going to see a change. We're going to see changes in the HPA axis. So in that postseason phase, we need to bring people back to a homeostatic balance. Now, what are your next set of goals, right? We can have an off season, we can talk about building muscle, we can talk about whatever. And then whatever that next pursuit is, we can jump into that active pursuit of goals.
Now, what does that look like? You did 10 weeks of being in a calorie deficit. You want to come out of it, you just come out of it?
I think that there's two really big schools of thought right now, and they're clashing hard.
Oh, really?
And I'm not taking sides, man, because
Tell us. I want to hear
I
this.
go back to the individual.
We'll
Well,
take a side.
there's the reverse
We'll take it
diets
for you.
of the world,
Okay.
right? Where it's like, hey, and it's a pretty standard protocol, right? Come out of your diet, add 20-ish% calories, and then add small increments. And then there's the recovery diet crowd, where it's like, fuck that, that's too slow. You're spending way too much time, suboptimal hormones, suboptimal thyroid. You need to add a significant amount of calories. You need to get over the mental shit of looking in the mirror, and you just need to accept the fact that you're going to add some body fat pretty quickly, and get it back up. Now, there's some people that are well equipped with that, and from physiology, I can understand.
Sure,
that.
I can make the case for both people.
I think it would depend on the person.
It
100%.
has to depend on the individual, and that's why I said I'm not going to take sides.
The wrong person on either side. Like, for example, the slow backing out, right? The wrong person for that would be the person that's obsessed with their body. They're so obsessed with looking a certain way, and they're afraid to get out of the super shredded condition. That could be a problem in the reverse diet.
And I would argue that I chose one way out of bodybuilding. I would not guide another client the same way I did.
How did
That's
you
because I
choose?
had the discipline, because I surged right back. So I gave myself a good solid week of very high calorie
Yep.
post being deprived for so
Right.
long, because I knew I needed it, but I also had the mental awareness and discipline to know what the fuck I was doing, and then go switch back down to a more balanced, closer to where my calorie maintenance
'cause
currently was.
The wrong person to go into the other option, which is the strong recovery, would be the person that has a tendency to binge, that has a tendency to just go off the rails where it's on or off type of deal. Now, there are studies that show that really, really high amounts of calories post being in a calorie deficit improves or increases your body's ability to store body fat, as if your body is trying
Yes.
to capture
Yep.
or improve its ability to capture fat. And it's funny in bodybuilding, this is something that's happened for as long as I can remember. Bodybuilders that would diet and bulk, they started to come into shows.
Softer and softer.
It was harder and harder to get lean, and it may be because they were adding fat cells each
Yeah,
time they
and
did those.
that's what I was going to say. It becomes hyperplasia, right? Like you're no longer just getting bigger fat cells; you're getting more fat cells.
Yeah.
Because of this yo-yo. I remember. Do you guys remember Scott Abel?
Yep.
So
Yeah,
Scott
yeah.
Abel, he used to say, like, you can starve yourself, and like it's one of the worst things you can do. But the single worst thing you can do is yo-yo diet. He's like, that will lead to more long-term disaster. And when he said it, I didn't understand context. Like, I mean, I was young in the game, but I always thought he was pretty ahead of the bodybuilding world with his knowledge, and so I studied a lot of his stuff. And as I've really understood more, and like exactly like you were talking about, adding more fat cells, I always go back to that statement from him.
And if you want to mimic evolution, yeah, I'm sure humans went through periods of feast and famine, but it wasn't famine that was 12 weeks and then feast that was 12 weeks.
Well, it wasn't famine and then feast for like 2 days, like extreme, and then sustained.
That's
either.
it. It was probably like one day of
Yeah.
we gotta hunt. Let's eat all this food. So they overfed for a day or two, and then they were right back down to
Which,
normal.
by the way, when we look at physiology, is
works-
actually a good thing.
it works great that way.
Like,
Yeah.
when we start looking at refeeds or periodic overfeeding or periodic diet breaks, that shit actually works.
Problem is
And
now
so-
we live in a world where it's very easy to go find that feast
That's
the very
it.
next day again.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why, for most clients, I never recommended they'd come out of a calorie deficit all at once.
Right.
It was mainly because of the psychological piece, because you're already in a deficit. You start to come out. As soon as you start eating extra calories, your appetite gets ramped the hell up. You already feel like you've been restricting yourself. So psychologically speaking, you feel like the chains are off of you. And then you just go overboard. And then it's this heavy boulder going down a hill. It's very, very
Now,
hard to
where
slow
do you
down.
stand, Jason, on cheat meals?
like define a cheat meal, right? Because
He's like, I have a polyamorous diet. There is no cheating.
I don't define it.
I think that the industry connotation of a cheat meal is like, hey, on Sunday night you're gonna go just completely gorge yourself and eat whatever you want, and I just think that's irresponsible to ever tell a client like, hey, there's no limitations and you can do whatever you want. And I think that if you're setting someone up for that, like, you're irresponsible with the rest of your approach. Honestly, the emphasis on the cheat meal is indifferent. It's what you're doing the other 6.5 days that completely needs to be changed. Like I'll reference Scott again, right? He had a diet called the cycle diet, and it was basically starve your ass off for 6 days and literally eat whatever you want for a day. Like, and he would he had like a forum, and I was like active on it, and he would like have like crazy people like gaining like 18 pounds in a day, right?
Yeah.
And so I did the diet, and like, so you know what it takes to get to like shredded glute status. I walked around with shredded glutes like day to day, like I was fucking peeled. I had
Just
no
scratching chairs with your shredded glutes.
but I had no sex drive, and it was like the emotional part was what fucked me up.
Yeah.
I didn't care about training anymore. I really had no interest in life.
Yeah.
All I thought about was like, man, what am I going to eat on Sunday?
That's just it, man. It's a psychological piece, because when you have an all out day, and you ever observe, of course you have, you've worked with tons of clients. When you observe somebody who's going through that period of like, oh, it's an all out day, I can eat whatever I want.
Yeah.
The binge mentality is not about the food, actually, not at all. You're
Just
not
look
even
at the behavior of what that
Exactly.
promotes.
you're not
and
even enjoying the food.
that's where I'm getting at with it.
It's
And
about the
that's-
food. It hasn't even gotten in your mouth yet.
That's where I was trying to get, like when you say like define a cheat meal, like, do I think that the act of allowing somebody to eat without any sort of mindfulness or restriction is a bad thing inherently? I don't. Like, I honestly I don't think it's the end of the world.
In terms of flexibility.
But I think if somebody's really desiring that, you need to take a step back and look at like what is the overall protocol that you're giving them that's asking for that. Now, are you asking me in a competition prep setting, or are you asking me in like real life setting? Because if it's a comp prep setting, listen, you're the one that decided to get on a stage in very little clothing and you need to look a certain way. And by the way, you're telling the world that I'm the one doing your diet. So I'm sorry, you're going to be a little bit restricted. But if you're just here and you're saying, I want to lose some weight and this is a lifelong thing, and we're genuinely trying to create transformation, and again, I'll reference the 10 years versus 10 weeks. Like if I'm setting you up to where you feel like you need that, I'm fucking up, not you.
Well, the name itself, cheat day, implies you're doing something
Deviation.
wrong. Yeah, exactly. Like but like to your point, do I think that having a surplus day of calories? No, it's actually a great and smart thing to do.
Yeah,
and I do that with any clients that I have in a caloric deficit, especially when I'm running them on a caloric deficit for weeks at a time. I will insert a high calorie day. I'll say, hey, Friday, because we've been running now for 4 days in a row of, 1,700 calories. I want you to have between 2,200 and 2,500 calories. And I'll give that as a goal,
I think I'm super neurotic, like when I work with clients, and I only work with a handful of clients anymore. I'll literally, when they're 6 to 8 weeks out from whatever their peak is, like if it's a physique show or like, dude, I'm looking at pictures and weight every day. And I'm calling these audibles, like what you were just describing. Like I'm looking and I'm like, all right, you're a little flat. We can push a little harder. And like, so I'm working with a WWE guy right now. And for the first time, I can't say who, because what I'm going to tell you, but like for the first time, it looks like he's going to make the main card on WrestleMania, which is a huge accomplishment for him, right?
Cool.
I was just going to say Gravedigger, but that's
the Undertaker.
Monster Trucks.
The Undertaker. I did work with his. Yes. I did work with his wife this year.
Oh no way!
Yeah,
really?
Yeah,
I love that guy.
So it looks like he's actually Bailey from WWE lives up here, and we were going to connect later today. I just started working with her.
Oh, very cool.
But yeah, like I mean, but like with him, the same deal. Like as it gets closer, we're looking every day, and I'm calling that audible, right? But I mean, it's such a neuroses, and so then we got to take a step back, and it's like, all right, what is the personality of this individual that's taking on this endeavor?
Well, here along those lines, I think this is a good question to ask. And we know that one thing that all diets that cause you to lose weight have in common is that they're all lower calories than you're burning. That's what they all have to be, regardless of what. Now, there's always been this debate. It's been around for a long time. What's better for fat loss, low carb or low fat? Now, both same calories and all that stuff, ultimately up to the individual. My question is this: how do you determine, or how do you help the client determine if they're going to do better with a lower calorie, low fat diet versus a low carb, low calorie diet?
So there's a lot to be considered here, and I think this is where, in my opinion, the industry is still fucking up. But from a science perspective, right, peer-reviewed research, it says assuming calories are controlled for properly and assuming protein is controlled for properly, the ratio of carbs to fat is indifferent when it comes to fat
Doesn't
loss.
matter.
Like that's what science tells us.
On a physiological level, doesn't matter.
Correct. Now, that's assuming, and I have to look at like what the control variables were and assume like there's no adaptations, there's no histories, like I don't know what the training stressor or life stressor was, but that to me is what's overlooked. Is like we're looking so myopically at the diet that we're now taking out all the other things that go into building a diet. What is life stress like? What is previous dietary attempts and stressors look like? What is your training stimulus? We could look at just an everyday person and draw two extreme examples. We could have a stay-at-home house mom, very low stress, right? She doesn't even have kids, stay-at-home wife. And she's like, I just get to chill. I get to go run up my husband's credit card, and life is fucking gold, right? Zero stress. She would be just fine on a low carb diet, right? There's no need for that carbohydrate. There's no extreme sympathetic response. She's probably not doing super intense weight training. And even if she is, that dose of intensity, that sympathetic response that you're going to get, it's really not that it's like negligible in the grand scheme of things. Now, we look at that completely different and we say, okay, that same person is a Fortune 500 CEO. And they go to work every day and they're in the fucking fire from 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. and they're putting out fires and they're responsible for all sorts of money and they're basically living in their sympathetic nervous system all day. Well, I would argue they should be a slightly higher carbohydrate diet, right? Because what's going to happen, like we know, and this goes back to when I'm going to say the words carb backloading, but like when that whole thing was completely bastardized, right? And the whole premise of it was, well, you wake up with elevated cortisol and elevated growth hormone. And so if you don't eat carbohydrates and you don't create an insulin spike, you're going to keep carbohydrates high, or you're going to keep that cortisol high, right? Cortisol is a catabolic hormone. It's non-selective, so it will break down some fat tissue in conjunction with muscle tissue. Well, so if you eat your protein, it'll offset that muscle breakdown, and now all of a sudden you've got this environment for fat loss. Like that was the premise of it. But if we look at that and we apply it to this like super high like sympathetic nervous system state, and cortisol is already through the roof, and now you're not having any carbs to create that insulin spike to potentially shut off that cortisol in the morning, then you walk in an environment, cortisol continues to shoot up all day, then you go in a training environment, you train with an extreme amount of stress, right? And you go like balls to the wall, you fucking do CrossFit or some stupid shit, right? All of a sudden, now you're creating an environment where if you don't have carbohydrates, you are asking, even in an adequate caloric state, to start messing with the HPA axis.
Because carbohydrates will raise insulin a little bit,
Yep.
and that insulin is inversely related with cortisol,
Yes.
right? So insulin goes up, cortisol goes down.
Yes.
So if you're so what you're saying is you have clients that want to burn body fat. The high stress ones typically do better with more carbs. The low stress ones typically do better with low carb.
I also think there's value too to assessing stool, hair, hormones,
sure.
and then knowing what foods correlate with that the most.
Yeah.
Right?
What does that come back to though?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Comes
So
back to
it's
stress.
right. And or knowing that, okay, I know that this person, based off of these things that I'm getting from feedback from them, may be deficient, and I know that this is a fat. I need to get more fat in their diet. So that person, I would definitely not recommend a lower fat, higher carbohydrate diet because of those reasons. So I think that gets brought into account also, right?
Yeah. And sometimes too, I've noticed this, and I've noticed this with clients. I've also noticed this with myself. When I am stressed, I do tend to crave more carbohydrates.
Sure.
Now, the problem is when I eat them, I tend to want more of them. And so then there's that factor too.
Sure.
What are your trigger foods? And maybe low carb works better for you because carbohydrates make you want to eat way more.
I mean, maybe it's not low carb, or maybe now you're messing with carb timing.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Good
And
idea.
so now maybe we're optimizing carb intake. So if you're 200 grams, you might have to have 50 grams pre-workout, 50 intra, 50 post, and then 50 before bed. So you don't have, right? Like you don't have the option.
That way
to
you're
eat more.
not going to eat a bunch of
You're not going to get up in the middle of the night, and if you do, like that's a whole another set of problems that we need to address.
Yeah.
So I do think there's ways to circumvent that, but like when I start looking at the physiological adaptations, because again, I believe the physical follows the physiological, and so if I'm setting you up to physiologically fail, then physically we're not going to be able to create what you want. Right. And we could use an extreme example too, like a UFC fighter. I worked with, like I had 3 knockouts last year, which was awesome, right? Like 3 people that I work with, and ultimately, like when they're in there, hydration is going to matter most, like the ability to rehydrate, but the ability to make weight on the scale is that whole industry is fucking it up.
Isn't it insane?
It's absurd the shit that would come my way.
Isn't the real game trying to be able to maintain like whatever weight that they're at, going into the weight? Or
so I worked with Luke Sanders when he knocked out Henan Barao last year, right? And that was a big deal because he had just come off a cut. That was our 3rd camp together, and right before that, he had worked with Perfecting Athletes, who is the ones that like Joanna hates because that's when she got knocked out by Rose, right? And I remember actually Andy Galpin was texting me as Luke was going through it, because I've been friends with him for a long time. He's like, yo, your boy's getting fucked over. Like he's just kind of like, he's hurting, like, and then the next night he fought, and whatever they do in terms of rehydration, it was terrible. Because he got clipped with like a looping punch that probably wouldn't have knocked any of us out, and it fucking set him down. And the ref called the fight, and it was a shitty loss for him. He shouldn't have lost that guy. Like I'm sure that guy's probably lost his contract by now. Luke's way better than that. And so we did it, and so this last one, it was great, right? Like we worked with, like you met Josh Cuthbert, like Josh did the strength and conditioning for him. I did the weight, and then Neuroforce One in Scottsdale did some of his conditioning. And it was beautiful, but Neuroforce came to me like 3 weeks out, and they're like, hey, don't you think his weight's a little high? And I'm like, no. I'm like, I need Luke training at the same weight he's going to be in the cage. And like and he likes to fight at 54, he has to weigh in at 35. And so I keep him as close to like 52 to 54 as I can. And then the last 3 weeks, I'll start bringing him down. But this was the first time I was able to go to his strength coaches and his conditioning people and say, hey, listen, I'm going to bring his carbohydrates down for 2 to 3 days. I need you to back the fuck off the training intensity. Because if they're ready to put their foot on the gas and I'm ready to pull my foot off in
that's a
terms
bad
of fuel,
combination, yeah.
it's a really
Yeah.
it's a recipe for disaster. But these fighters, they don't know any better. They're trained to fucking run
they'll
through
do
a
every
brick
tool
wall,
they do, yeah.
right? So all of a sudden, their strength coach is like, more, like get in the sweatsuit, like run, and it's like, no, like go fucking sleep.
Now they took the rehydrating with the IVs.
They took that out.
Right? Thank
Yeah.
God. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's made weight cutting a little safer. You still just nature of the industry, man. Like somebody, gets knocked out of a fight like 2 weeks out, and they're like, they call someone, they're like, hey, can you make weight? Well, yeah, you can make weight. Like you can suffer it. If people saw some of the shit that happens, they'd be blown away.
Oh, I've seen guys lose
Yeah, I
20
feel
pounds
for these
I've
fighters,
seen-
man.
I've seen people lose 20 pounds in one day.
Yeah.
In the
One
sauna.
day?
1 day.
Yeah.
No way.
Dude, we purposefully.
That's
Bro,
insane.
you
So-
you
so
could
Luke-
probably do it. It would kill you, but you could lose
do
20
it.
pounds.
Yeah, you could do it easy. So
Bro,
look,
you
look
are
at how
sweating. You're not drinking. You're pissing.
I mean, you're talking to
hours and
somebody
hours
who's
and hours.
manipulated weight like crazy and know that I could gain 20 in a day.
But the problem with it is like a lot of these idiot people that come into this space that think, oh, weight cutting is super simple. They look at like water myopically,
Yeah,
like
right.
water in, water out, right?
Yeah.
Or like
not what I'm doing
the only way to get it
hormonally
out.
long term for this person.
Well, yeah, but there's 4 ways to manipulate water in the body too. Like you don't have to just go start sweating,
Right.
There's 4 different, like I mean, there's 4 pathways
carbohydrates
that I
for-
use.
yeah.
I use total intake, like I use carbohydrate, I use total water intake, I use electrolytes, and then I use sweat.
Yeah.
And if you do it right, like this last camp, dude, we cut in 90 minutes. We cut 7 pounds the night before the fight in 90 minutes.
in 90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Wow,
Right?
that's great.
I mean, the fucking week was. I mean, dude,
Now,
the
how did
stars
the-
aligned.
But
That's
easy. You figure
beautiful.
for every carbohydrate, your body for every 3 grams of carbs, your body holds on to 3 ounces of water.
It's every gram of carbs is 2.7 water.
Right. So
Yep.
if you've actually done a really good job of keeping his water up high
Exactly.
and his carbohydrate intake really good, I used to be able to move my weight like that because I would keep it really good and healthy all the way. So then when I wanted to throttle down that last week, I could make just a few adjustments and make
100%.
moves like that for sure.
So we're starting 10 days out, right? Like we're water loading, we're shutting off aldosterone, we're shutting off ADH,
Yeah.
right? Then we're moving carbs. Like we pull the carbs out because when aldosterone and ADH are shut off, you're not reabsorbing, right? You're not reabsorbing water. So now you pull the carbs out, right? You pull the carbs out, there's no water reabsorption. So when the carbs are out, any water they were holding moves with it. That's the initial drop, right? Then you still got the super high water. Now we remove the electrolytes, right? So any sodium that was holding the water, now more water's out. Then like the day before, we bring the water out. Like aldosterone and ADH are still out, so you're not reabsorbing, but nothing's coming in. So now you're dropping more water. And then finally, because you're fucking hydrated, right? Like your body, like, you still had water coming in, so you still have water to sweat out. You'll crack instantly in the sauna. So if you ever watch those guys, like they're rubbing sweet sweat everywhere.
They can't
They
sweat.
can't crack. And it's because they cut their fucking water 48 to 72 hours out. And it's like, you ain't got no fucking water in you to move. Like you've sent signals to your body not to sweat for natural
You
survival.
know how dangerous that is too, to go into a sauna
Yeah.
and not sweat.
I don't care how much Abilene you got. The shit ain't coming out.
Now, what does
So-
that stuff do, by the way? What is that?
Man,
that
I
sweet
wish
scent-
I
Yeah,
knew.
what is
I wish
that?
I knew the mechanism.
It can't be good.
But I know that like
You rub it on, and you
Well,
just start
especially
sweating.
when you're sending a
ask the
conflicting
waist
signal
trainer girls,
internally to your body saying "Don't fucking sweat."
Exactly.
And then you're trying to rub the
Yeah.
shit out.
Well, I mean, ask the bikini girls. They fucking rub it on their abs like every day, and then they put the little waist trainer on, and they're like,
man.
"Look how much water came
Is our
off."
space?
And it's
Is
like-
Mind Pump not helping?
Oh, yeah,
Are we,
yeah.
have we not? We haven't made. Is
Not
the
that much of an
space not
impact
getting
yet.
better
they're
at all?
not. They're not listening.
Yeah, they're not.
They obviously think you guys are bullshitting or
Oh
something.
my
but
god,
no,
this
it's
space is
Now,
bad.
the one macronutrient that seems to be consistent regardless of fat loss or muscle gain is protein.
Yep.
I mean, studies show high protein levels for fat loss diets. It's better for satiety, so you're full. It preserves more muscle. It seems to reduce the metabolic adaptation that happens when you reduce calories. When you're bulking, high protein builds more muscle. Are there ever cases where that's not good? Is there ever situations where you're working with clients and you're like, look, I know typically we want high protein, but for you, I think we should probably cut it down?
I think that you always have a goal of where you want protein, and then you got to look at how life gets in the way. Or you got to look at where they're coming from. Like, I'm not going to take someone that comes to me and you'd be shocked. Well, maybe you wouldn't be, but like some of the intakes I get, it's 30 grams of protein.
Yeah.
Like,
For the whole day.
people are like, they ate 30 grams.
That's
of
actually way more. We used to have
that's
this debate
hard.
on Mind Pump a lot because we talked about the bodybuilding space, which I think is way different mentality than the average consumer. And most of my female clients were grossly under eating protein. Which this reminds me too of another point that we were talking about, being able to burn fat and build muscle and how rare it is. This is another case where sometimes you see this if somebody was grossly under eating protein for a long period of time, and just simply by bumping their protein intake and the fact that you're adding weights into their routine, you see this kind of bump of muscle.
Yeah, and I mean, then we could go down that rabbit hole deeper, and obviously we're living in the game changers time right now where veganism and vegetarianism is being really promoted, right? And so a lot of people are really, if they're following that, and unfortunately I have seen a lot of people in the space jump on that bandwagon, and I think it might have been you guys. Like the one benefit that I think actually came from that was like at least people are eating plants again. I think Sal, you said it, right? Like there was a benefit, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like we can sit here and we can all get on our high horse and be like, we know veganism is not the way, but like at the end of the day, there's more emphasis on people eating quality foods. I don't think it's that bad, right? But like we look at these people and it's like, if I could get you to consume 15 to 20 grams of essential aminos and maybe like 5 to 10 grams of branched chains with that diet, I bet you'd start to see, even in a small calorie deficit, I think you'd start to see some lean tissue
that is
acquisition.
the one population that benefits from branched amino acids and essential amino acid supplement.
Exactly.
People who are in the low protein diet community. So if you're vegan, vegetarian, if your protein intake is not, maybe half a gram per pound of body weight at least, that's when you see the benefit. In fact,
that's the only time that I ever really prescribe it.
And studies actually show it. Studies show you give BCAAs to somebody who has low protein intake, and they get great results. You give it to a guy with high protein intake, it does nothing.
It doesn't do shit.
It does nothing at all. Yeah.
And I mean, anytime I've ever prescribed it before, it's been more on like the performance continuum, because there were some studies that came out with like with leucine that showed like a reduction in rate of perceived exertion and an increase in time to exhaustion, and it had nothing to do with muscle, right? Like it was never about lean tissue acquisition. It was just like, hey, there may be a small performance benefit. So like that's like when I used to dose leucine, like via just BCAAs. Like I never have people do leucine alone, but what your question was like on the protein intake. Like,
like do you ever have people taking less? Is it
I don't intentionally. Yeah, I mean, if your gut's fucked up, we're gonna have to back off. Also, I mean, if I've got somebody that's, and this is a rare population, but really pursuing a lot of muscle gain, and they're like in an extended off season, and they've just got a super fast metabolism. I mean, I can't give a 200 pounder 600 700 grams of protein. Now ironically, I literally just landed before this podcast, and on the way over here I was listening to Ben Pack's podcast with Milos, and they were talking about Milos's training journals, and Milos was talking about how he never, he's got it documented in journals, never one day in his competitive career did he consume less than 450 grams of protein. And he was sitting down with Nasser, the late Nasser, right? And Nasser was like, yeah, right, you're crazy, but he's like, if you're doing 450, I better do 550. And actually, he thought Milos was bullshitting him, so Nasser only ended up eating 250 grams for a while, and he's like, oh, Milos telling me all the wrong stuff to screw me over. But yeah, I mean, high protein got vilified for a little while, and it's just the nature of our industry. I believe everything is cyclical. Right now, I think you're finally starting to see keto fade a little bit. It's finally moving through. There's an understanding around it. So, what are we in 2020? In 2030, it's going to get hot again, right? It'll go away. High carbohydrate diets will get popular. Everyone's going to be like, I can eat my fucking carbs again.
We also have to look at context, because a high protein diet in the context of a lot of inflammation and a lot of calories. So let's say an unhealthy diet that's high calorie, high protein could be a cancer driver. It 100%. Could contribute to other health problems, but so could carbohydrates in the same context, or excess fats in the same context. So sometimes I look at studies and I read them, and it's like people with high, fat intake have this, and that. But then you notice that, they're all high calorie consumers, and none of them are exercising, and they have a poor diet. And I could look at any macronutrient under those circumstances.
I think you bring up a really good point too, in the sense that anytime we bring up a dietary protocol, right? Anytime we talk about proteins, carbs, fats, calories, there's automatically this assumption that it applies to body composition, right? Everybody, you hear the word diet, you instantly think body composition, body fat loss, muscle gain, and there's a whole continuum of things that we need to be looking at relative to our diets, how we feel, our health status, our longevity, all of these things that don't relate to just how you look. And so, I mean, you asked about protein. I mean, immediately my assumption went to lean tissue, right? And then you bring that up and it's like, no, you're 100% right. Somebody that potentially that has cancer or is going through treatments, like, no, I'd probably be backing off, to be honest. And then you start looking at like the types of protein inside of a specified situation like that, right? Like there's, most common source of protein in a lot of people is chicken breast, right? And you start looking at, okay, well, that's predominantly omega-6 fats. So now we're creating a pro-inflammatory effect in someone that's got cancer, and well, that's a pretty shitty way to prescribe to somebody.
Sure.
Right? So there's a lot of areas that have to be considered that it's a much deeper investigation.
Well, I think we're somewhere where we all strongly agree is no matter what your goal is, whether it's fat loss or muscle building, the first thing, and it's probably weeks, maybe months, which that's my question for you, is how long you think it normally is. You should be focused mainly on getting healthy and figuring all that out before you go any direction or try to go any direction, and that should be your main focus. Now, to that point, and we all agree on that, what do you think is most common, and how long do you normally spend with somebody like this from taking them? And I know, of course, this depends on how fucked up they were when you got them, but what's kind of a range look like normally?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to give you like a typical range. Unfortunately, for a long time, like I was, you guys, like around the time I was talking about it, and you guys, and there was a couple other people in the industry that were brave enough to actually say this shit. There's a marketing component that comes into this where trainers don't want to go to their clients that are overweight and say, hey, I can't help you lose weight yet because I need to fix you. And they're afraid they're going to lose money, right? And new coaches can't afford to lose money. They gotta take money. So I think it takes a coach that's really secure in who they are and really secure in like the big picture of business first off, right? Like that has to be acknowledged in this space. Second, a person knows how fucked up they are. Right. So if it's like, if you really didn't know you were doing shit wrong by being in extreme calorie deficit and you really haven't seen the effects, a lot of times it's pretty quick, man. Couple weeks, 4-6 weeks max. Right. A lot of times there's no adaptation that's even been created. And by actually providing, like what you said, Sal, earlier, by providing the right amount of calories, which is an increase in calories, you actually start seeing results. I wrote a blog one time on reverse dieting, and I was like, there's three responses. You either gain weight because you're adding in calories and you've adapted to a low calorie state. You don't gain weight, but your biofeedback gets better. That's not terrible. Or you're the lucky one that makes your coach look really good. You're a hyper responder and you start losing weight right away. That was written 2-3 years ago. The longer I've been around that, I realize it really comes down to two factors: duration, and like the degree of the adaptation. So like how long have you been in a metabolically adapted state, and what was the degree of what you were doing that got you to that adapted state? And really those are the two factors that are going to mitigate the process of creating health status before we begin a diet. And that goes into the whole like losing fat and building muscle. It's like in an ideal scenario, if you came to me today and you're at ground zero, like we could probably get a significant amount of fat off in 12 weeks. And then we could probably reverse you out pretty quick and then focus on building muscle.
I want to get back into like the muscle building component of this whole conversation and like talk about, so you do bring somebody back to this homeostasis, they're in a healthy place, but now like you're taking them through like the bulking phase.
Sure.
What does that look like in terms of the amount of calories, like something a typical client you have, like trying to guide them through that, and whether or not it's consistently throughout or you're doing it intermittently, like what's that look like?
So I think this is, again, you got to look at what is the personality of the person. So initially, like Adam, when you came out of a competition prep and you're like going in the off season, like you're very strong mentally, but the average person, they're like, oh, it's off season time, I get to fucking eat everything. And like you give them a protocol, and let's say it's a protocol that's like pretty calorically in a surplus. But you also have to know that this person is probably going to have a propensity to eat off that plan. So let's just say you're estimating daily energy expenditure to be 3,000. you decide to put them in a calorie surplus of 1,000, so you're giving them 4,000. You have to know that inherently this person's probably going to be consuming closer to 5,000, right? Like, adjusted for weekly average intake based on how many times they're going to deviate. I don't think that's advisable at all, right? That's a recipe for a lot of fat gain, not a lot of muscle gain. And remember, your body has a certain range where it's most efficient, right? Where once you step outside of that, you're gaining more fat than you're gaining muscle. So I'm a little bit of a slower approach guy myself, but I don't even want to necessarily speak to speed as much as it is sustainability. Like, I don't want, if your goal is to build muscle and then you're going to look in the mirror 2 weeks later and be like, oh my God, I'm fat, and now you feel like you want to cut, that's a problem in and of itself. So, I guess the questions I would then turn around and ask are why are we building muscle, right? Is it for a stage? Is it just for life? Is it for strength? Like what is the purpose? Is there a time that like we need to have this muscle built?
Say it's just this person that wants to
to get bigger, right?
Be
like
and
lifestyle.
lean though at the same time,
right? So then we're going to put you in a super small deficit or a super small surplus, which by the way, like longevity says you should be in a super small deficit, but from a super small surplus and then accounting for life. Like I'm talking like 200 to 300 calories.
Oh, it's
surplus.
a real small deficit.
Very small surplus, right?
Or surplus.
Yeah,
too.
very small surplus. But then you factor in life. Date night happens, couple drinks happen, and now look at like the weekly adjusted surplus.
But you're going in there as a coach knowing that. So
I'm going in there knowing that. It's not a prescription based on what's physiologically correct.
Now, is this something that you teach your coaches also?
Oh, 100%.
Oh, so this is all part of the conversation. See, this is why we like you guys, because that makes perfect sense. Because if you don't account for what's probably going to happen, then your recommendation plus life is going to add up to too big of a surplus.
Well, you don't get to live in a fantasy world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like we can live in the lab all day. The lab isn't where life takes place, right? Like we step out of here and fucking life hits us, and you never know what's going to happen.
Well,
you got to be ready to account for it.
That's the problem of the coaches and trainers and people that purely speak from the scientific studies that are with these small control groups, and then that they get their direction purely from that. It's like there's so many other things that you have to account for that have nothing to do with that.
Part of it's experience, but luckily, again, like you guys are teaching people the right way. It's like, hey, look, here's what it says on paper. You want them at a 400 to 500 calorie surplus. But here's what happens in real life. You put them on a 200 calorie surplus because they're going to mess up a few times during the week, which is going to come out to about a 500 calorie surplus.
Yeah, like when you start creating that weekly adjustment, it does. And then, it is experience, man. I mean, again, like we can't expect the general population to act with the like the level of being strict as like a competitor would, or as somebody of like a lab, right? You can't expect the general population to have their actions align with lab controlled settings. It's not going to ever happen. Like
now I want to talk to you about some of the athletes you've worked with, because this gets real fun. Athletes are much more controlled,
fun. Yeah,
much
they
more
actually
specific.
do everything we ask them to.
They have to, or they're going to get their butts kicked or whatever. What have you noticed? Because you've worked with quite a few, and some at very, very high levels. What have you noticed tend to be like better sources of carbs in terms of performance? Because you can get carbohydrates, for example, from a lot of different sources. But are there sources that you find seem to just work better for most of your athletes?
So here's the crazy part that maybe a lot of people would never have considered. The answer is yes. They're all like, and they're all whole foods, right? So like sweet potatoes, white rice are staples, right? Like I live in those. But that being said, as the season wears on, I get a lot looser in terms of my like what I'll allow for carbs.
Oh,
so let's use like George Kittle, right? He's NFC Championship this weekend.
Yeah.
Like when him and I first talked right before the season, it was like I wanted high molecular weight carbs post-workout. He's an athlete. Like I understand there's no like benefit to muscle in that window. Like let's just end that debate, right? It's a nervous system response.
And now what is high molecular weight carbohydrates?
So like some like rapidly absorbed carbs, right? So I'm like talking about like I use highly branched cyclic dextrin.
Okay.
And that's 100% a CNS issue, right? Like you're coming out of a sympathetic training session, I'm trying to create that parasympathetic shift and get you into that like,
fast as
recovery.
possible.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the anabolic window. Like we could end that, right? So before people are like, oh, Jason talked about the anabolic window. No, I didn't say shit about
No, what
that.
you're saying makes perfect sense. And these are carbs that just fast gastric emptying,
Yes.
absorbed in the system very quickly.
Yeah. And especially for a guy like him where he struggles to eat anyway. And most athletes, you'd be surprised,
Yeah.
struggle to eat enough. Maybe you wouldn't, right? It's especially like their needs. We're talking 4,000 or 5,000 calories, sometimes more.
What is a guy like him, like a like what is he eating like before his main competition?
So my advice with somebody like him is 3 hours out of the competition. I'm getting in like what I say to him is a complete meal, a protein source, a carbohydrate source, and like a vegetable and a fat source. Right? That's what I want.
Everything.
Right? Now, I don't want like extreme hunger going in, but I want a little bit of hunger. Right? And so.
Now, why do you want a little bit of hunger going into the
So
game?
when hunger starts to rise, it's a physiological signal that cortisol is starting to rise. Right? I want that slight cortisol elevation. Why? It triggers sympathetic nervous system.
It gives you energy, man.
I want that fight or flight,
Yeah.
right? And then this goes back to the whole dietary, like nutritional periodization. I know 100% that I'm intentionally leveraging cortisol in a season. That shouldn't happen in like real life, real health
No,
scenario.
totally
You
different.
don't want that, right? But I fucking want it. Like you're playing in the Super Bowl. I want you on a cortisol drip.
Yeah.
I want every ounce of nervous system strength and physical strength that you have for those 3 hours that you're playing the damn game.
I like
because
that you
now
already
I got
called it.
now I got 3
He's
months
gonna be in the Super Bowl.
to like yeah, he is going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They're going to destroy Green Bay
Yeah,
this weekend.
I'm betting that way.
Yeah, I don't even think it's close.
So why do you get looser with?
So I get looser because quantity becomes even more important, right? So we've done such a good job in the off season of making sure that you're at that homeostatic balance, that you're in a position to perform early in the season. But let's be honest, athletes are a little lazy, right? Like when it comes to nutrition, they'll fucking train their asses
an
off.
afterthought.
They'll play their ass off, and they think that they can get by without maximizing this. And so towards the end, it's like, hey, you need a bowl of cereal at night? Like go ahead and have 3. Right. And you need some carbs
Magic
in the
Spoon's
morning.
good for that.
Like you need to throw some honey in there and like you need to throw like a little extra sugar in there. Like go do what you got to do.
Awesome.
And so as it gets on, like it's not health, right? Inflammation's already happening. Like those things are already present. Of course, we want to control them, but they're doing a lot of physical recovery modalities. My whole goal at that point is performance and recovery. Nothing else. I don't give a fuck about your body fat levels. I don't give a fuck about your biomarkers. Like I don't give a shit about that. And that's what people don't understand. Like when I'm in season and I'm working with an athlete, whether it's an NFL player on the field, a UFC fighter in the cage, whatever your sport is, you paid me at the beginning to make sure
you're
that you
squeezing
perform
performance.
your best. The end. You didn't tell me you want to get on the podium with abs, right?
Yeah.
You paid me to win, and that's what we do. Now afterwards, it's my obligation to say to you, hey, we made some health sacrifices along the way. We need to get healthy so that next year we can do this shit again.
Perfect. So you said sweet potatoes, white rice. You notice seem to be very, very good.
Those are my
source of-
staples, man. Those
Probably
are-
because they're easy to
those are-
digest.
And honestly, like steel cut oats in the morning.
Yeah.
I love cream of rice, honestly. Like I like oat bran and cream of rice a little bit better.
What about grits?
I mean, I'll use them in a dietary thing,
Okay.
and or like in a
Southern
dietary
thing.
protocol. But I'm not a fan of grits myself. So,
I worked with clients and some athletes, and I find it's just easier to digest.
Sure.
That makes them better sources. What about sources of protein? Now, bodybuilders for a long time have said how red meat is phenomenal source of protein, especially in the off season, because on a gram for gram basis, they still get more strength gains. I think it has to do with the creatine content of red meat
Or the
Have you-
cholesterol.
Have you noticed any
think-
differences between protein sources for athletes?
when we start looking at the old school like bodybuilders that said like they get more strength from red meat, I think calorie for calorie, an ounce of red meat is just higher, right? And back in the day, like how were diets set up? Well, in the beginning of the diet, you eat more red meat, you eat more carbohydrate,
Yeah.
and then over the course of the diet, well, you remove carbs from meal 5. Or you switch your red meats to white meats, or you switch your white meats to white
That's
fish.
how they got their-
right. Like that's how they did it.
That's how they drop their calories.
Yeah, that's how they dropped calories. So I really think it was just a calorie for calorie
Okay.
thing, or a fat, like a gram of fat per gram of fat thing. I'm definitely a big fan of red meat. I mean, honestly, like when you start looking at the ratio of fats, the fats in red meat are healthier. We see less inflammation from red meat, better amino acid profile from red meat. And again, when we're looking at caloric density of a person who doesn't like to eat a lot, I'd love to use red meat.
Do you ever use organ meats with your athletes?
I don't, only because and not because it wouldn't work and it wouldn't be a great source of protein, but I'm also talking to people who either are hiring a chef or who are literally like, what is the minimal amount of time I can spend getting my shit together?
Yeah.
And they're not going to want to eat liver.
They don't.
or heart.
They don't give a fuck. Now
They want burgers
I worked
and
with
steaks.
Solomon Hill, who I don't fucking know what team he's playing for now, but I worked with him when he was with the Pelicans, and he had a chef, and his chef would be like, tell me exactly like what's going to be best, and I'll put it together. Now he happened to be vegan, but so like we were always trying to like circumvent that. But,
that's cool.
Yeah, every now and then. Actually, do you guys know Dan Henry, the internet marketer? He's a big time internet marketer guy. He just reached out to me last week, and he's like, I'll hire a chef, and you tell that chef like the best possible thing.
That's
he's
cool.
like, all I want to be is jacked and ripped, and I'm like, cool, dude.
like
we
the
can do
perfect
it.
client.
So yeah, no, and like, and I mean, he's got the money to be able to do it. So
That's great.
Yeah, so like we just
That's
connected
fun.
last week. Yeah, like I
fun.
love things
right,
like that.
because
Like,
then you could use it as an
I get
experiment.
really excited on ones like that. But it's I don't know how you guys feel about this. Like, as you guys sort of, you were in the industry, like in the trenches for like a long time. Now you kind of get to observe the industry. Every now and then I really get this itch to get back in the industry and to do it with like a small number of people.
Well, I think that we all do that. I've got two people I'm talking to
Yeah.
that are family
Yeah.
friends. I always train one client. It's
I just reopened a coaching funnel to take on like 20 to 30 clients, like max. Now
just
I
wanna
do
keep a
everything
pulse.
through text message, right? Like, so I work super closely with my people. So like, if you work with me, you're getting 100% of me, but I get these itches.
Well, it reminds for me too. It's about because nothing I love more than doing what we do now. I mean, I love the podcast and what it does, but getting to train clients reminds me of the questions they ask,
Yes.
and so that just makes better content here. It's like
it's your pulse on the
It
industry.
keeps you grounded. If I'm not working with people or working out in gyms or managing gyms or working with trainers, or I start to feel like I float off the ground, and I'm speaking on this podcast out to the internet. It's not the same thing. I think it's an important thing that you should do, especially if you're communicating it.
Well, and I mean, how do you know what the industry trends are? I mean, you could read the media, but like, how do you know how clients are responding, how they're experiencing it, how they're, how it's affecting them? Because again, we go back to like the scientific studies and the academia world. And I love how you came out and you were like, you had issues with like the academia world.
yeah.
And like, I actually, that was
So much
like
shit.
that shit. And I know you got so much shit for that, but like, I loved when you came out because you're one of the most intelligent. Actually, like, you came to the event and everyone's like, Sal is really wise. Like, that was the word everyone used for you, right? But like, it's true.
like
Like,
an owl.
you can interpret scientific studies and extrapolate what you need, but you're also able to look at real life and say, okay, like, we don't live in a fucking incubator. Like, we don't live in a lab. Like, we live in this beautiful thing called a world where great things take place that are not always in line with scientific studies. And I think you have to have the scientific knowledge. You have to know what's happening, but more importantly, you got to understand the human being that you're trying to help, man. Like, at the end of the day, we could talk about any topic, and I'm gonna still try and bring it back to the human being, because millions of people will download this episode of the podcast, but each one is going to be in a car, in the gym, they got their headphones on a plane, right? And they're one person, and they're listening to it with one application, and they're living their unique life and their unique circumstances, and they want their unique result. And if you don't know how to take all this information in your head and you don't know how to apply it to that situation, or you can't help them apply it to that situation, like, you as a coach, you suck.
Yeah.
Like, bottom line, you
look,
suck.
If you go back, 100 years, and you asked scientists then, and you said, "Hey, what do you think would happen if all of us, all of a sudden, had access to all of recorded human history?" They would have said, "Oh, it would have been a utopia. All of our problems would have been solved." Well, here we are, and the problems are still here.
Yeah.
And what we're realizing is it's not an information problem; it's a wisdom problem. And being able to communicate fitness and nutrition and health is extremely important. And 9 out of 10 times, it's not your ability to recite factual information. 9 out of 10 times, be able to relate and be able to communicate the right information and communicate it the right way. And that took me 10 years. It took me 10 years as a personal trainer to figure out. It took me a long time. And I know these guys echo the same thing.
Well, it's funny. I had a conversation with a girl, one of like my the guy that does my email blast. He sent one out yesterday, and it was like, "Hey, like, what do you want to know from me?" And all these people responded. And this one girl was like, I need to know how to get clients and do this. And I wrote her back and I told her about like how we help businesses. And I'm like, I'd be happy to get on a call and help you out. She's like, yeah, like I just invested in this other like mentorship, which is all information. And I'm like, there's these coaches like, listen, everyone needs a certification. Everyone needs to get certified and have their shit, right? The problem with you helping people isn't because you don't know enough. Either you're not confident enough in yourself or you haven't figured out how to connect with the person, understand what they truly need. And those are things that you have to get in the trenches for. And you have to learn to live. And you got to start looking at human beings and stop trying to look for like cases. And that's where that's the separation between great coaches and good coaches.
It's a different. That's why we chose to work with you. There's a lot of nutritional courses and certifications out there, but for us they would leave us thinking like this is not really giving coaches the tools that they really need to be successful. And I think you guys focus on that. Make it a priority.
I shared with you guys how the whole thing came to be, right? How I built the Nutritional Coaching Institute. So I was at an event in Southern California. It was a mastermind, and fuck your mastermind, by the way, right? Like I got to get you guys to like wear those shirts out. I gave those guys.
We should have worn them today.
I thought about wearing mine here, and I was like, that's gonna look weird going through the airport. But yeah, no. So it's I was at an event, and this really well-known internet marketer was like, dude, like you're helping so many people, but like it's your method that's really good, right? It's not just you. And he's like, you need to build a certification. And I was like, it's the nutrition industry. Everyone knows who the gold standard nutrition certification is. I'm like, I can't compete with them. And he's like, no, like you have something special. You need to find it and you need to do it. And he was like adamant. And it's somebody I really respected. And I was like, okay. So I got my car and I was driving from SoCal. At the time I was living in Arizona. And I got halfway home and it hit me. Like it was like a ton of bricks just hit me right in the face. And I was like, it's like, you're really good at connection and application. And like everything got so clear in that instant. I drove the rest of the way home, left my shit in my car, ran to my desk, opened up a journal, wrote out the whole outline of what the course was. It was like part 1, science, all the topics, part 2, application, all the topics. And I never deviated. Like that was the shit we put in version 1 of the course. And like, that's the shit that we continue to teach. And like, I knew right then that's why I was successful. It's why we had built what we had built, but also how literally millions of people can become successful with it. And
how many coaches have you guys certified?
Man, we've put over 3,000 through at this point.
Good for you.
And we'll be 3 years old in July.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so we're pretty young in the space, but I think that you're starting. My favorite part is we're getting a lot of people from our competitor, and they're coming and they're saying you filled in the gap, and that was exactly what we aim to do, right? Like you said, people finish the certification and they feel like they don't have exactly what they need, and we said no, like we're going to give you what you need to go out and. Our models evolved, right? Like in the beginning, it was like I had a level 1 course, and then I'm like, cool, like if you want, you can take these other courses. Now I look at what we do a little more as a trade school, right? If you don't need to go to college and pay for extra science degree, and you certainly don't need to become an RD, right? But you don't need to be $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in debt, right? We have an institute. It is designed to take you from zero knowledge to like scaling a business, because we do have a business course as well, right? Like, I'm sorry, coaches out there, if you don't understand business, you're not going to have impact.
Oh my
in this
gosh,
world.
you could be the best trainer coach in the world, but if you don't understand how to run your business, you're screwed.
So we have all those, man. It's literally designed to take you from that startup to ultimately scaling your business. And man, like we've got some dope stories. Like I'm doing a webinar tonight, and like one of the testimonials I use, she sat in the very first cert ever in Chicago, and her second year, like so last year was the second year that we were live, she made $250,000 as a coach.
Wow.
She had no fucking traditional knowledge.
Wow, good for her. That's exceptional.
It was unreal, man.
That's
and like those are the stories that just get me super hyped. And
what do you think about? I know some countries are talking about regulating coaches and trainers through the government. And I know there's been some talk about that here in the U.S., which I think would be a complete disaster. That's my own opinion. What do you think about that? What do you think about a federal kind of nationalized standards for coaches and trainers?
I mean, I guess we kind of have one in the RD sense. Like you can't write a diet unless you're an RD. Yet I've had RDs come through my course and say they learned more in 48 hours about really helping people than they did in 4 years of an internship. I think it would give a lot. It would. There's obviously benefits to it, and I understand why. But in typical like bureaucratic fashion, they're gonna
be
fuck
disaster.
up. Like they're gonna fuck up the application,
Totally.
right? And they're gonna end up hurting a lot more people than they are helping people.
Yeah.
So I don't welcome it. That being said, I mean, if we're looking at it, you know, do you really need to be certified to give advice? And at the end of the day, as a coach, we can't put a gun to a client's head. We're just giving our best advice, right? As coaches, we're becoming advocates for our clients, and we're looking out for their best interests and laying out what we believe to be the best route to success. At the end of the day, they have to follow it.
Very cool.
And I don't think that the government is ever going to be able to regulate that.
Good, good. Now you're hooking up our listeners
Yes.
special
Yes.
right now with this episode. I'm going to put you on the spot here. So what are they getting? What are they getting? This is not our normal NCI.
No.
hookup.
So what we've done before for your listeners is we've done, you know, we did a scholarship. We selected somebody. We gave away all of our courses, which is a $10,000 value. And we've given away some of our master classes, which are $600 a piece. But I wanted to do something special, man. Like, you know, I came here like 2 years ago, and I was early in like the evolution of my career, and you guys supported me, and like, you know, I'm still fortunate enough to like text you guys. You just came to the event, and like that's super cool and means more to me than you guys know. And so now I want to pay that forward to the millions of people that listen to you guys. And so, like I said, all of our courses, if somebody wants to do the Institute, it's a $10,000 investment. I'm just going to wipe 70% for your followers and your listeners.
Wow.
And so I don't want to misquote the link, so I won't say it, but I'll let you guys put it in the show notes because I need to check with my team. But it's literally, there's one link you have to go. Like if you go to my normal site, ncicertifications.com, everything's full price on there. But if you guys go through the Mind Pump link, which you guys can post.
We'll do it in the intro, I think.
All right, yeah, do it in the intro. That'd be dope. But if you guys go through that link, there's a video. You just simply, you know, you apply. You tell me like, hey, I heard this on Mind Pump. Within a day, my team will reach out to you and instantly give you 70% off, and they'll do a payment plan. Like they'll work with you. Like we treat it like college. Like if you need to pay it over time, pay it over time. Like we really believe that this is the key to, if you want to create help and you really want to increase your knowledge, but really have that application to actually go out and create impact. Like we say impact over everything. If you really want to go out and have that impact, man, like we know we have the resources. And so I'm super humbled to do that for you guys.
Excellent. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. And thanks for coming on the show, brother.
Dude, absolutely appreciate you guys having me here today.
Oh, it was a great time.